Thank you for being here with me for our next episode of Providence and Prophecy. We're doing Daniel chapter 5 today, which is a fun one because it's the writing on the wall, and I think it's the writing on the wall has become such a famous part of our culture that I think we almost kind of misuse the saying. Like for example, if I were to say, um, you know, the writing's on the wall, it's going to be a rough week for people in Florida this week. Um, what I'm saying is, it is obvious to everyone that it's going to be a rough week for people in Florida. The writing's on the wall; it's right there; it's obvious. The funny thing is that in the story of the writing of the on the wall in Daniel, things were not obvious to everyone there. The writing on the wall was an absolute mystery, and only one person was able to reveal that mystery. So it's always struck me as kind of funny that we have taken that story and the writing on the wall and made it into, oh, everything's obvious, when it was actually the opposite. We've reversed it. But the this account has fascinated people for generations, and I actually wanted to start today with the with a poem, which, yeah, I'm not always huge into poetry, but this one's, I think, kind of interesting because it is by George Gordon. You might know him as Lord Byron, and the Vision of Belshazzar. And so it's a poetic summary of what we're about to read. And so, we can be cultured. We can do a little poetry. This could be fun. So I'll read it for you because I'm not going to make anybody else do it. So, Vision of Belshazzar by George Gordon Byron. The king was on his throne. The satraps thronged the hall. 1,000 bright lamps shone o'er that high festival. 1,000 cups of gold in Judah deemed divine. Jehovah's vessels hold the godless heathen's wine. In that same hour and hall, the fingers of a hand came forth against the wall and wrote as if on sand. The fingers of a man, a solitary hand, along the letters ran and traced them like a wand. The monarch saw and shook and bade no more rejoice. All bloodless waxed his look and tremulous his voice. Let the men of lore appear, the wisest of the earth, and expound the words of fear which mar our royal mirth. Chaldea's seers are good, but here they have no skill, and the unknown letters stood untold and awful still. And Babel's men of age are wise and deep in lore, but now they were not sage. They saw, but knew not more. A captive in the land, a stranger and a youth, he heard the king's command. He saw that writing's truth. The lamps around were bright, the prophecy in view. He read it on that night. The morrow proved it true. Belshazzar's grave is made, his kingdom passed away. He in the balance weighed is light and worthless clay. The shroud, his robe of state, his canopy, the stone. The Mede is at his gate, the Persian on his throne. So every once in a while, a poem can be fun, but a summary of that account, by one of Britain's greatest poets. So, and then one other thing, just to reset us, we are now very near the end of Daniel's life. Remember, Daniel was born in Israel. By the time he was taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, he was a young man. Yeah, who knows? Maybe 15, maybe 20, somewhere in there. But in order, and it has to be that young in order to live long enough to get to the point where Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom at the end of our reading today. So this is at the very end of the Babylonian Empire. We're going to hear about the fall of Babylon today, at least briefly. And so Daniel at this point is probably, 80, 85 years old. Next week is Daniel in the lion's den. So if you ever pictured Daniel in the lion's den as a young man, you were wrong. Daniel was definitely an old man when he was thrown to the lions, which in some ways to me, yeah, it puts a different spin on that story that we'll look at next week. So We are right here at the end of the Babylonian Empire, just before the turn of the century there. So, and then one of the things that is kind of a mystery and kind of fun about this reading and this account is the question of who is this Belshazzar? Because up until about 1864, many scholars and people the world over said, "Oh, this Belshazzar guy, he was just made up to be put in the Bible. He wasn't a real person," because there was no archaeological evidence of him. But then in 1864, the archaeological world got turned on its head. So just a couple of slides to take you through here, just to show you this idea of who is this King Belshazzar who sees the writing on the wall. So first we've got a Chaldean historian, and I'm going to pretend that his name is pronounced Berosus. I don't know if that's true or not, but we're going to say that Berosus, the Chaldean historian, as quoted by Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian in the 1st century AD. So Berosus said that Nebuchadnezzar was succeeded in the kingdom by his son, Evil Merodach, which I'm sure did not mean that he was evil. Yeah, it's just different languages, different letters, different sounds. So who reigned badly and was put to death by Neriglissor, the husband of his sister, after he had reigned 2 years. So his Nebuchadnezzar's son did not last as long as Nebuchadnezzar. This Neriglissor succeeded him and reigned 4 years. His son, and here, if you ever want to know how tough names can be, Laborosoarkad is what I'm going to say that is, being still a child, reigned after him 9 months and was murdered by his friends because he gave many proofs of a bad character. Apparently, they didn't have much patience and they weren't going to wait for him to wake up or grow up. So as you can see, there's not much stability in this kingdom, and that will weaken a kingdom. So his murderers, by a general resolution, transferred the kingdom to Nabonidus, usually pronounced and spelled Nabonidus, one of the Babylonians who belonged to the conspirators. So, stick with me. Under him, the walls of Babylon along the riverbanks were better built, but in the 17th year of his reign, Cyrus came from Persia with a great army and took Babylon after he had subjugated all the rest of Asia. Nabonidus went out to encounter him, but was vanquished in battle and fled with a few followers and shut himself up in Borsippa. But Cyrus, after he had taken Babylon and demolished its walls, marched against Borsippa and besieged Nabonidus. But Nabonidus would not hold out and therefore surrendered himself. He was at first treated humanely by Cyrus, who removed him from Babylon and gave him Carmania as a place of residence, where he spent the remainder of his days and died. So that is what happened according to this Berosus, the Chaldean historian, as quoted by Josephus. But Herodotus and Xenophon, Greek historians, describe the last king of Babylon as the king's son, while Nabonidus, according to both of these Chaldean historians, was not of royal descent. So he was from a different family. Like, right, remember the family or the people who murdered the child king. Besides this, Xenophon states that the king lost his life at the taking of Babylon, while according to Berosus, on the contrary, he was not in Babylon at all, but was besieged in Borsippa, surrendered to Cyrus, and was banished to Carmania, or, according to Abydenus, was made deputy of that province. So, shall we decide for Herodotus and Xenophon? Were they right? And against Berosus and Abydenus? Were they wrong? Yeah. Whose seemingly contradictory historical account do we believe? And so that is one of the things that often gets run into with the Bible and history, and really anytime you're dealing with apparently conflicting stories in general. We'll see things and go, oh, these must conflict somehow. And what we really want is for things to fit all just nicely, perfectly together, kind of like a dovetailed drawer. Like, you take two pieces of wood and, oh, everything fits perfectly and understand it, and all that's easy and great and wonderful. But when things kind of apparently contradict, what sometimes people do is go, oh, that contradicts. There's no way that this can work together. And so what the many scholars believed was Belshazzar was made up. This is an example of how the Bible is not reliable. This Belshazzar is made up, and we shouldn't trust the historicity of the Bible. And this is how they were saying that it contradicted. Let me show you this. So it said, who do you believe? Herodotus and Xenophon, who said that the last king of Babylon was the king's son, or do you believe Berosus and Abydos, who said the last king of Babylon was not of royal birth? Do you believe Herodotus and Xenophon in that the king of Babylon, the king was in Babylon at the time of Babylon's fall? Or do you believe these guys who said the king was not in Babylon but was in Borsippa? Do you believe Herodotus and Xenophon, who said the king was killed in Babylon? Or do you believe Berosus and Abydos, who said the king was exiled and died of natural causes? And so you've got this apparent contradiction. Well, in 1854, there were 4 clay cylinders with cuneiform writing discovered that cast some light on this. So it says, "As for me, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, save me from sinning against your great Godhead." So this is a prayer to his God. "And grant me as a present a life long of days. And as for Belshazzar, the eldest son, my offspring, instill reverence for your great Godhead in his heart, and may he not commit any cultic mistake. May he be sated with a life of satisfied with a life of plenitude, a life of abundance. In the beginning of my everlasting reign, they sent me a dream." So he's saying the gods sent him a dream. "Marduk, the great lord, and Sin, the luminary of heaven and the netherworld, the god of the moon, stood together. Marduk spoke with me. Nabonidus, king of Babylon, carry bricks on your riding horse, rebuild a Hulhul, which is a temple in Haran, and cause Sin, the great lord, to reestablish his residence in its midst. Reverently I spoke to the Enlil of the gods, Marduk. That temple which you ordered me to build, the Mede surrounds it, and his might is excessive. But Marduk spoke with me. The Mede whom you mentioned, he, his country, and the kings who march at his side will be no more." So here Nabonidus is saying he's living here in Babylon, and Haran is where this temple is that he's supposed to go and restore, right? So he's here in Babylon, temple is up there. That presents a little bit of a problem. So the Nabonidus continues, "When the 3rd year was about to begin, he entrusted the army to his oldest son, his firstborn, who, if you might remember, is named Belshazzar. The troops in the country he ordered under his command. He let everything go, entrusted the kingship to him, to his son, and himself he started out for a long journey." He started out for the long journey up to Haran. So, the last king of Babylon, was he the king's son, or was the last king of Babylon not of royal birth? Well, if you're talking about Nabonidus, yeah, he was not of royal birth. If you're talking about Belshazzar, the regent, the one who was left in charge, yeah, he is the king's son. Was the king not in Babylon, but in Borsippa? Sure, Nabonidus was not in Babylon. He ended up in Borsippa, but Belshazzar was in Babylon at the time of Babylon's fall. Was he killed in Babylon? Sure, Belshazzar was the regent, the acting king. And then was he exiled and died of natural causes? Yeah, sure, Nabonidus was. And so, interestingly enough, this is a picture of the newspaper article that came out back in 1864, and especially here, focusing near the bottom, at talking about the discovery. Says the most important fact, however, which they disclose, which is the cylinders, which they disclose, is that the eldest son of Nabonidus was named Belshazzar, and that he was admitted by his father to a share in the government. This name is undoubtedly the Belshazzar of Daniel, and thus furnishes us with a key to the explanation of that great historical problem, which has hitherto defied solution. We can now understand how Belshazzar, as joint king with his father, may have been governor of Babylon when the city was attacked by the combined forces of the Medes and Persians, and may have perished in the assault which followed, while Nabonidus, leading a force to the relief of the place, was defeated and obliged to take refuge in the neighboring town of Borsippa, capitulating after a short resistance and being subsequently assigned, according to Berosus, an honorable retirement in Carmania by the discovery, and so then on and on. I just find it fascinating that people looked at it and went, this can't line up. The Bible must be wrong. But then they got more information and saw, nope, actually, it all fit together just perfectly. Now, I don't base my faith on the fact that we found a cylinder of cuneiform writing somewhere in Babylon, but it does reassure me to just stop and think for a moment and say, if something appears to contradict, maybe I just don't have the whole story. And that's exactly what happened here. So I hope that wasn't too much background for you, but I had to nerd out just a little bit because I thought it was fun. So I hope you enjoyed going on that little trip with me. So now getting into the meat of the reading itself, our big idea for today. So the big idea in the game or on the sidelines. We worship the Lord Almighty, who rules and governs this world. He is the God of providence. So what does that make us? If our God is all powerful, are we just his fans? Are we spectators who cheer God on? Or do we have a part to play? So the first thing that we'll start with reading is Daniel 5, verses 1 to 4, just to get the first part of it started. And I've got those right here.
Sharing a different thing than you're actually looking at for the screen. We've got the Lossmans in front of us on our screen.
Oh, that's not what I intended. Larry and Connie are nice people. They're my in-laws.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm actually sharing the right thing. There we go. Screen 2. Was I sharing the slides that whole time?
No. Yes.
Okay.
You were.
Just maybe not in
And
the
then
right
you went
order.
back to the Lossmans.
Okay. Sorry about that. Here we go.
That's right. Thanks.
Thank you for letting me know. Daniel chapter 5. So King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Two things about that. You might remember that all the way at the beginning in Daniel chapter 1, it didn't mention that Nebuchadnezzar did take the articles from the temple and put them into the temple of his god in Babylon. So there was a little bit of foreshadowing there. And then also you might have noticed it said Nebuchadnezzar, his father, and we just talked about how he wasn't actually biologically his father. That is not an uncommon way of speaking, especially in the ancient world. The word father would often be used as predecessor, and son would be used as successor. I think you can see that even in Elijah and Elisha. They were not blood relations at all, and yet Elisha would speak of Elijah as my father, right? And things like that. So don't let that bother you. It's just a different way of speaking than what we're used to. So that the king got the gold and silver goblets, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So, seems like it's an odd time for a party, because if we were to read all the way through the chapter, at the very end of this, what becomes very obvious is the Persians are besieging Babylon right now. The city is under siege. They are surrounded by a whole army of their enemies, and it is going to be this very day, that Babylon's going to fall, their empire is going to fall, and Belshazzar is going to die, and they're having a party. How could they party with an enemy at the gates? just to kind of put ourselves into that mindset. Um, and part of this is reaching back into some of the things we've talked about Babylon before. Do you remember those pictures from last week of just how big Babylon was, of how massive the walls were? You could drive 4 chariots around on top of the walls of Babylon. So there's a lot of pride going on. They really believe that their city and their fortress is strong enough to handle this. But I think there's something else going on too, um, especially if you look at the end of this here. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. This isn't just a party. What else is it?
A funeral?
Not quite. It's going to become one,
Gonna be one.
but they don't want to believe that. It's a combination of a party and something else.
Worship?
Yeah.
Ah,
See, it's a combination of a party that they're all enjoying, right? But they're also intentionally making a religious element to this. Because here's one of my pet peeves, and maybe you've experienced this too. If you've ever experienced somebody who doesn't believe in God, will look at the actions of a believer and assume that their actions have some kind of worldly motivation rather than a spiritual motivation. Like, oh, those Christians, they just go to church because it's their social time. Well, yeah, there's a social element to it, but that's not why I go to church. I go to church because of my relationship with God. And it's almost like it bothers me because like you're assuming that I don't believe what I say I believe, right? I don't want to do the same thing to these people. They believed in their gods. They did. They were very, very dedicated to their religion. They had strong faith in their false gods. That doesn't help them very much, but they still did believe in that. And so I don't want us to ever look at these ancient people and say, oh, they must have been just having a party, or they were just prideful because of their walls. I think you can see here, Belshazzar is also confident because of his gods. And he wants to make sure that he is on his God's good side if the enemy is outside of the gates. And I think that gives us a clue about the kind of our next little topic here, which is of all the days to bring out the goblets from the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, why this day? Why did it make a difference what the cups they were drinking out of? I think it made a religious difference. The conquering of Judah and Israel to the north by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, these were not small things. Judah and Israel were powerful nations, powerful enough that, which one? In Nineveh. I actually just recently watched a fascinating video on this. It was part of Dad/Pastor Pete's daily devotions. He sent out something about Nineveh and a video of Nineveh, and the king of Nineveh had this huge mural made about his conquering of the city of Lachish in Judah. It was a major military victory to conquer so much of Judah. So as King Belshazzar is taking out these goblets that he put in his temple, that Nebuchadnezzar put in his God's temple, why did Nebuchadnezzar put those goblets in the temple in the first place? What was he demonstrating? I took your God's stuff, and now your God's stuff is my God's stuff. Therefore, my God is greater than your God. What is he reminding all the people around him of? Look at all the victories our gods have given us in the past. Look, we can drink out of the Lord's cups because we beat the Lord. We beat the God of Israel. And so, the party, the celebration, the worship, all of this is not just a, hey, let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's much more, let's eat, drink, and worship because this is where our strength comes from. Is much more believable to me than just, hey, they had a party because they were bored. right? Any other thoughts, questions about that? We got the stage pretty well set.
I just have a question, and maybe I
yeah.
missed it, Dave, but how do we know? Like I was just in chapter 4, it's about the dream and everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do we know that just right off the bat in 5 that everybody's outside the gates, like, ready to do that? Maybe I missed that.
Thank you. You didn't miss anything. I didn't explain it very well. If you look at the very end of this chapter, we will get to that very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So we get just the result. And from other historical sources, like Xenophon and all those other that we've been mentioning before, they described the all of them agreed with the idea. Yes, there was a party going on. That is corroborated by secular sources as well, that there was this party going on, that they were under siege, and even they gave the account that the way that this massive city with its massive walls was conquered was Babylon sat on the Euphrates River. Pretty sure I'm remembering that right. It's either the Tigris or the Euphrates. Pretty sure it's the Euphrates. And there was the river actually flowed through an arch in the wall. So what did they do? They diverted the river, walked down the riverbed into the city, which is a pretty genius way to conquer the city. And also a reason why you might think that they would be having this party, because they would be expecting, they haven't even done any damage to our wall yet. How are they possibly going to get through? Well, they had a pretty good idea. So thank you for asking that question. But now, after a little setting the stage, let's get into the party itself. We'll read verses 5 through 16, I believe. Yeah. So suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means." So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I've heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Interesting thing in Daniel chapter 2, God communicated with Nebuchadnezzar by means of a dream. Again, in chapter 4, he communicated with him by means of a dream. And now, it might feel a little bit jarring. All of a sudden, we have a hand writing on a wall, something that has never been seen before in the Bible and would never be seen again. Why does God change this pattern of communication? I don't know that we can be certain of this. It's just an interesting kind of thing to think about. Think about this. Belshazzar takes these goblets out of the temple of his god, and they're all going to drink from them, which is just blasphemy of the highest order, right? And he's going to die that night. God is not even going to wait to give him this vision till he goes to sleep. He's going to show him right now, and he's going to show all 1,000 people in this party right now. I find that fascinating that God is willing to just go, you know what? All of you need to know this. All of you need to know this right now, because the hammer is going to fall tonight before you sleep, and because all of you need to know this. Just an incredible example of God doing what God thinks he needs to do because God wants to do it. He can do these things. But then moving on a little bit, no one could understand the writing except Daniel. Did God need Daniel?
Nobody used him.
Yes. And I'll actually bring it up later. How many of you like to be used? Yeah, doesn't sound right. The only person I like to be used by is God. But we'll get to that later. It's a privilege for Daniel. Yeah, God doesn't need Daniel. It's a privilege for Daniel. And yet at the same time, if God wanted to, he could have very easily he could have just written this in a way that Belshazzar would have understood. What benefit, though, is there to having Daniel do it, to having Daniel involved?
To show his glory, his power, his
His
dominion.
glory, power, dominion. Fantastic. What else? What other benefits show up? Think about how Daniel gets introduced. What do we learn about, or what are we reminded about Daniel by the way he's introduced?
That he helped his dad.
He's got a reputation for this, right? And that reputation is connected to what deity? Are you Daniel, one of the exiles that my father, the king, brought from Judah? Right? Let me see. The queen. Yeah. Well, they're sorry, but it's just this part. But he gets connected back to this is that God's guy. And before that, all of Daniel's history he had always been the Lord's guy. It gets connected back to the Lord. Nobody could possibly say, "Oh, you know what? This must just be some random deity that's telling us this," because Daniel, the Lord has been using Daniel all these years. Their reputations are entwined, and it makes it even more obvious what God is this. Yeah, this is a very polytheistic culture. It identifies the Lord as the Lord, and once again identifies Daniel as one of the Lord's people. I also find it kind of fascinating that everybody forgot about Daniel except for this one queen. Daniel might have thought that his career was over. Nope. Not everyone had forgotten about him, and God still had work for him to do. The last time that I did a study on Daniel, I don't know if you remember this or not, but the Charlie Hebdo newspaper in France, anybody remember why they were famous? They published a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad, and there were massive riots and murder and all that sort of thing. Right? Just if it is, well, here, let's ask the question. Why don't Christians riot when unflattering Jesus cartoons get published? Is it because Muslims believe in Muhammad more fervently than we believe in Jesus? I sure hope not. Why don't Christians riot when unfledged, because they get published all the time.
Right.
Why don't we riot?
That makes me think of the love is patient, love is kind, love is not self-serving. That aspect of it, as opposed to the if you do this, if you offend our God, we are going to kill you style.
Yeah, this is good. We do have commands about turning the other cheek and such thing, right?
Well,
How-
God does the fighting for us, so we don't have to.
Huh.
God will be the ultimate judge.
Yeah. And when you say ultimate judge, it makes me think of the last day. Is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, judge on the last day. He knows the heart, and we don't have to do anything on our own accord.
And one of the two, actually, there's two Bible stories that jump into my head. I can't remember if I put those here or not. Nope. The story of Gideon. That's why it's called the question is called Jerubbaal and riots. If you're a real big Bible nerd and you remember the name Jerubbaal, anybody remember why he was named that? It means let Baal contend with him. Because the first thing that Gideon did, the judge Gideon, the leader of God's Old Testament people before the kings, he goes and he tore down Baal's altar, and he chopped up the Asherah pole that was beside it. He desecrated the idol's place of worship, and he sacrificed a bull on the Lord's. He just totally messed with Baal's spot and Baal's stuff. And the next morning, the people of the town want to kill him. But Gideon's father said, can't Baal defend his own stuff? Let Baal contend with him. If Baal's a god, surely he could punish my son if he wanted to. But he's not. So what does that tell you about Baal? Right? God doesn't need us to defend him. Right? He can do that himself. That doesn't necessarily mean that I don't care if people are disrespectful or blasphemous toward my God, but there's a difference in the feeling of I must defend my God's honor, and I do want him to be treated with respect. There's just a different level of fury involved in those two things. God just doesn't need us to do that. He can take care of himself. Daniel's answer, a very bold one when you think of a guy standing in front of not only the king, but 1,000 people at this banquet. Definitely intimidating scene. So Daniel gives a 4-part answer to Belshazzar. Let's kind of try to summarize them and say what is the point Daniel's trying to make? What's he got going here? So Daniel's answer is this. So first, then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. This might be my favorite part of the whole thing. Because Belshazzar had promised Daniel, I'll make you the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom, which sounds pretty good. Except for the fact that Daniel knows that being 3rd highest ruler of the kingdom would be a title that he would hold for a couple hours. Right? What's the point of being made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom when the kingdom is going to fall that day? Yeah, you can keep your rewards. I'm good. I don't need that for the next couple hours. Right? Secondly, though, it's Daniel saying, I'm not telling you this because you paid me. Right? He doesn't need to be bribed to give Belshazzar this message. It's just, no, I'm doing this because I'm the Lord's prophet, not because you're going to give me a purple shirt. So there's part one. Then, Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. So Daniel says to Belshazzar, gives him kind of a history lesson. What's the main point of his history lesson?
He had
Pointing
power.
out,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, pointing out that God was in control, and because I guess just because I don't know, I can't say this right, but I guess God was in control.
God was in control, absolutely right. And in control of who specifically? Nebuchadnezzar, right? And what does he say about Nebuchadnezzar? How does he describe Nebuchadnezzar? The goat, right? Nebuchadnezzar is the greatest of all time. Nebuchadnezzar is just, right? And compare his description of Nebuchadnezzar with Belshazzar's situation. Because of the high position God gave Nebuchadnezzar, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Do all the peoples of every nation and language dread and fear Belshazzar? No. There's an army outside of his gates right now that's going to come and kill him, right? If Nebuchadnezzar is the goat, if he is the greatest, if he is this powerful king, Daniel's pointing out, yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, this king, acknowledged that God is in control. You, this king, have not. You've made a large error, Belshazzar. And then you can see that especially going into the next part here. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand, but you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. That's a bold thing to say to a guy who can say off with your head as quickly as he can say, bring me another glass of wine, right? But Daniel is saying Nebuchadnezzar was here and he humbled himself under the Lord's hand. You, Belshazzar, you were here and you exalted yourself over the Lord. Once again, you have made a huge, huge error, a huge sin. You're way out of your depth, which is, again, kind of a bold thing to say to one of the leaders of one of the greatest nations. Well, it's about to fall, but historically one of the greatest nations in the world, that he was way out of his depth. And then finally, the last part, the fourth part, is the prophecy itself, or the writing and its interpretation. So this is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And here's what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So then there's the actual writing right there and the description or the interpretation of it. About the interpretation of the dream, or of the writing, excuse me. I got this out of the People's Bible, very helpful little chart that can help us understand why this was hard for people to understand. So The mystery of the writing does not seem to be in the language or the characters, but in the meaning. The words can have more than one meaning, which cause confusion. So mene can mean numbered, or it can mean the unit of money called a mina. Tekel can mean weighed, or it can mean like a shekel, a smaller amount of money than a mina. So think $50, $1, and then Perez parsin means divided, half a shekel, or the Persians. So imagine you see a hand appear on a wall and write $50, $1, 50 cents. You might be a little confused. And then you go, well, maybe it means numbered, weighed, divided. I don't know what that would mean. Or does it mean numbered shekel Persians or mina weighed Persians? Or so there's a number of different things that it could mean. And how do they work together? How does this work? And so then you end up with, mena numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting, right? You have not humbled yourself. You were not the king that Nebuchadnezzar was. You are a weak successor to a great kingdom. And then Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So that's Daniel's whole speech and the meaning of the writing on the wall that no one could understand. And so then the last couple of verses. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Interestingly enough, now with what you know about Babylonian history, especially the fall of Babylon and the whole kingship situation, why was he offered to be the third highest in the kingdom? Why not the second highest? Why the third?
Wasn't Nebuchadnezzar still number one?
Not Nebuchadnezzar, but his father. Now the name is escaping me too. And it's not in the biblical text. It was in here. Whatever his name was.
Right.
Nabonidus. Nabonidus was the king. So Nabonidus, the king, is not in the city, and Belshazzar is number 2. So the highest rank he can give is number 3. A clue to the solution, the historical solution that made all this fit together, was right there in the biblical text, but nobody could understand it without the extra context that Nabonidus cylinder gave. So kind of an interesting thing. It's the only example of somebody being made third highest ruler in the kingdom as a reward that I'm aware of. And it just sounds funny because usually they go, oh, you'll be the second highest, like Joseph and the Pharaoh, right? But no, this time third, because there was somebody above him yet, his father. And then that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Interestingly enough, if you were to search the internet for Darius the Mede, you're going to find some of the same sorts of things said about him that people used to say about Belshazzar. They'll say, Darius the Mede doesn't appear in any, we have no historical reference to him. The Bible must have made him up. I think it's funny that in the same biblical account, they said the same thing about Belshazzar earlier in the reading, and then find his archaeological things and go, oh, nope, the Bible was right. And then later on go, oh, here's another guy that nobody else knows about, so the Bible must be wrong again. Maybe you just don't have the whole story. Maybe there's gaps in knowledge, and just be content with the fact that there are gaps in the knowledge until something comes and fills them in. It doesn't mean that the Bible's wrong. It just might mean that we don't have the whole story. We have the story that God wanted us to have, and then there's all kinds of history that we may not have. I shudder to think about if the Lord lets the world go on for another 2,000 years, how many gaps in history there will be, because all of our history is now kept on computers, and they're all going to break, right? At least we have clay cylinders with writing on them that we can find and learn more about this. So a little bit of humility is in order when we're talking history.
The
Yeah.
question I had was why did they say the inscription say meanie twice as opposed to that was the word that was the only one they said twice. Was that
That
just
is true. It is
it?
the only one they say twice. I don't know if I have. I don't know if I have an answer for that one.
The only
if
thought I had was sometimes in Old Testament poetry, when you said something twice, you're trying to emphasize it more. Was that
Mhm.
the thing?
It could be, and I mean that one is the one that numbered, as in it's over. If you
Yeah.
didn't catch it the first time, it's over.
Mhm.
Possibly,
Oh no.
possibly.
Okay.
Why? Why?
And get this back. So a couple more little things. So just an interesting the contrast. God did not need Daniel, and God certainly did not need Belshazzar. Belshazzar probably thought of himself as very important. He's this king regent. He's a ruler of this incredibly powerful city. And to God, it's like, no, you're done. I'm done with you. What had Belshazzar forgotten? He had forgotten how much he needed God. He had forgotten how weak he truly was, how dependent he truly was, how that how yeah it is so easy for us to think that we are absolutely necessary. And right now I'm remembering the line that my grandpa had heard somewhere and told Dad, the cemetery is filled with people that the world couldn't do without. As it turns out, the world goes on. We are not the essential be all end all of all things, but we are loved by the be all end all of all things. That's what makes us special. Not that we are so important in and of ourselves and that so much depends on us, but rather so much depends on Him, and He has chosen to rule it all for our benefit. I would rather have that than some kind of trumped up importance for myself, some kind of inflated ego of my own. No, I'm important because of the value God has put on me, not because of my own. Here's one little question for you. Agree or disagree? Speaking gospel is a greater privilege than speaking law. God gave Daniel a message of pure law. Yeah, your days are numbered. You have been found wanting. You're not good enough, and your kingdom is given to the divided and given to the Persians. No gospel there at all. What do you think? Greater privilege to speak gospel, to God's good news, than to speak law, God's demands? How about this? Which one would you prefer?
I would definitely prefer to speak gospel, and
Yeah, me
the
too.
Old Testament was written in gospel in law, or
Not
written
not all, but with lots of law. Yeah.
yeah. And the thing with obviously that people weren't able to keep that perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And the gospel, I think, is what kind of brought that around to full circle, I would say.
Yes. And so if I look at what is God's primary message, what is the message that predominates, what is the God's crowning thing? Well, it is the gospel. But at the same time, it was an incredible privilege for Daniel to be God's mouthpiece, no matter what the message was. And it is an incredible privilege for us to be God's mouthpiece, no matter what the message is. Do you have a comment about that, Ken?
No.
Oh, sorry. I just saw you unmuted. So
I thought he would have one.
look at Dawn. There's a helper suitable. Say something. But yeah, it is not really for us even to choose what it is that we speak. Our God has given us his word and we speak all of it. It's a privilege to have it all. So law or gospel part 2. God doesn't need you. Is that law or gospel?
I'd say gospel, because that just means God's good and he's got it and he doesn't need us.
This is true, yes. How is the opposite also true? That it is law.
That we're not good enough. Like we're
Not that one.
not good enough, but like more that we can't fulfill the part that he fulfills in the world. Like we don't, we sin and he doesn't. And so that might be the law parts. I don't know.
Could be. How about this?
What?
What's the most important thing that you do in your life, Deanna? What's your most important role?
I'm a mom, I'm a wife.
Yep. Usually
love
mom wives list them in that order. They look at it and go, most important role for me is I have to take care of these children, and then there's that guy over there. That's fine. But does God need you to be a mom?
No. Does
That's
he?
really
I
hard.
don't know.
No, that's really hard to say, isn't it? Because does God need me to be a dad? Does God need me to be a husband? Does God need me to work at the church? There are times where I want to believe all of those things. That I am so important in whatever role that I have that it wouldn't work without me. And then it's law. Then I need to hear, no, God doesn't need me. My God is enough for my kids, even if I'm not there. My God is enough for my spouse, even if I'm not there. Would it hurt? Sure. But would God still be enough? Yes. God's, anybody that works in a church, I remember in school, I had a teacher who said, the great tragedy of ministry is that people spend the first 20 years of their ministry working for themselves. And then they spend the second 20 years of their ministry working for their congregation. And then they spend the third 20 years of their ministry working for the kingdom. What's the problem with that math? Ken got it. How many people have 60-year careers?
Many.
Right. And so his point to us was, we got to flip that. All you guys need to go straight out of the seminary and start, put yourselves aside, put what you think of as your ministry aside, work for the good of God's kingdom, work for the good of God's glory. Right? It's not about me. And sometimes my sinful nature needs to hear that because I really want to make it about me. I really want to make me be the most important thing that, God needs me. Because without me, everything will go to pot. And that is gloriously and blissfully not true.
It's interesting, and this is not meant as a criticism, but just how the devil can sneak into that. Pastors are always concerned about, did this sermon land? Did I communicate this correctly? And obviously it's understandable the heart that it comes from, but they put way too much on them in the message. And I know they mean that in the best way, but way too much on them and not near as much on the Holy Spirit working that message through those people. So.
Right. Yeah. And so that would be an example of, needed or used. It might sound strange, but I'd rather be used by God than needed by him. Takes the pressure off. What are a few wonderful ways that God doesn't need you? What are a few wonderful ways that God chooses to use you? If we were to all sit and make a couple of those lists, the fun thing that you'd probably realize is that those lists would be the same. He doesn't need you to do the things that you do. And yet he does choose to use you in those ways. It's not that God is burdening you. It is not that God is putting pressure on you. It is that God is giving you these wonderful opportunities to serve him, to be his people, to fill the roles he's given you to fill. And it's not because he needs you. It's not because you have to. It's not because it'll all fall apart if it isn't for you. No, God's got all of it. He's just choosing to give you an incredible privilege, and he values you enough that he wants you to have it. It's a difference it's a perspective difference that only Christians can have, and a real gift, and especially helpful in those roles where you feel like you are absolutely wearing out, and that there's all this pressure on you, and that there are certain sermons you remember your whole life, or at least you remember parts of them. And Mark Paustian is a professor at Martin Luther College, and he preached one where almost the whole sermon he was just kept repeating, because so much depends, so much depends, so much depends on Mark, on himself, right? So much depends, so much depends, so much depends on you, and other examples of so much depending on the person, right? And he kind of ended the sermon with, no, so much depends, so much depends. So much depends on Jesus. And you could just feel the whole room just go, yeah, it does depend on him, and he's the only one that can carry it.
Oops.
Go ahead, Don.
Did God put a conscience in everybody?
Oh, yeah.
Because part of that, I mean, that we don't even technically have to tell people that they're doing wrong, because
Yeah.
deep down they know they're doing wrong. I mean, is that
Yeah.
another sort of thing that he doesn't need us because he's already taken care of that to a degree?
He certainly has. Yeah, sometimes we do take it on ourselves. We have to convince the whole world that they're wrong, that they're sinful. No, we don't. Consciences are at work. Yeah, we should be faithful witnesses to God's word, but God's not depending on us to change the hearts of people, right? That's a good point. We don't even have to convince people that God exists. Bible passage says that God has placed eternity in the heart of people. I don't know. Yeah, for all the ways people try to lie to themselves and say, death is just part of life. I've never heard anybody sing the circle of life from The Lion King in an ICU. That does not happen. Nobody walks in there and just goes, it's the circle of life, right? Does not happen, because everybody, when they come face to face with it, looks at death and goes, no, that is the enemy. That is something that is not supposed to happen. That is something that is wrong. And only in Christ is death transformed into the gateway to heaven. It's still not something that we look forward to going through. It's still not pretty, but yeah, God has taken the sting out of it. He's taken the sin out of it, so the sting is gone out of it. So now it just serves its purpose of bringing us to be with him. So yeah, we don't even have to convince people that eternity is a thing. God has put that into people's hearts too. So, kind of summary thought, where we've been, that God is independent. He doesn't need anyone to defend him, to provide for him, or to speak for him. But even though he can take care of himself and accomplish his own goals, he chooses to do so through people. He does his will through us. What an awesome God we have. What a marvelous privilege he gives us. That is what I get when I read the writing on the wall. What an amazing privilege it is to be one of God's people, just like it was for Daniel. God made it abundantly clear to Belshazzar, I can show you whatever I want to show you. And you know how I'm going to do it? yeah, sure, there's going to be this disembodied ghost hand that's going to be up here doing this, but you're going to need one of my people. You're going to need one of my people if you're going to understand this. It's really cool to get to be one of God's people. Any other thoughts about Daniel 5? Any other questions?
I had one question.
Sure, go for it, Matt.
Verse 17.
Yeah.
Daniel answered the king, keep your gifts. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means.
Mhm.
I'm trying to, obviously there's not the context there that'd be helpful, but is that slightly arrogant on Daniel's end to, all right, yeah, no matter what you have, I know that I'll be able to do this? Or is that, I mean, maybe God went to him ahead of time? I don't know. It just seems a little on the, I don't want to say arrogant really, but how did Daniel know, that he was for sure going to be able to do that?
That would be an example, I think, like you said, of we don't have
Context.
everything, all
Okay.
that context there. We don't have every time, we don't have everything that God said to everybody. One of my favorite examples of that is the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus. Jesus says to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Right? And then later on in the book of Acts, Paul says, as he's telling his own story, he says that Jesus said to him, Paul, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads, hard for you to kick against the sharp stick that I'm using to poke you in the direction I want you to go. Whenever we read the Bible, we can know this is the word of God. This is the very words that God wants us to know and that God wanted the people to write. But we shouldn't ever assume that we have every last thing that God said, right? Because that's an argument from silence. We shouldn't look at Paul and go, oh, before he just said, why do you persecute me? And here he said he's kicking against the goats. He must be making something up. No, he just gave us part of the story in one place, part in another. So entirely possible that God said to Daniel, hey, here's the message. Go. Just like when Elijah is on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, and you go, man, it's pretty presumptuous for him to say, we're going to do this whole setup, this whole showdown, and the God who answers by fire, he's God. There's a reason why I don't tell the confirmation kids that I teach for public school to go to school and say, hey, all of you who don't believe in God, I'm going to put my lunch on the lunch table and I'm going to pray to God. And when he sends fire, all of you will know that God is real. There's a reason I don't tell the kids to do that. It's because later on in Elijah's prayer, he prays to the Lord, Lord, let it be known that I have done all of these things at your command, right? God did tell him to do it. So entirely possible, but one of those places where we have to recognize, no, we don't have all the details. Also, we don't, for those of us who are not used to speaking in a king's court, it might sound kind of flowery and official. Belshazzar certainly didn't respond as if this was disrespect. And I don't think that there's anything in the language itself that demands that it be in any way disrespectful. So I think from that context, you'd have to go, no, this is just the way they talked. So good question.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have yourselves a wonderful week, and I will see you next week.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.